But if you want to blend it or have some fun, or you can do that with the fact that you have more control over your skill set and where your points go. And that's what I liked about Fallout, where they presented you with a series of skills and a series of attributes. And they're like, go ahead and define who you think you are in this world, and just make sure that all those skills and abilities actually do have equal weight in the environment. Like Fallout has that challenge where if you have the high charisma and speech, of course you have to include the path for talking characters, but sometimes game masters will miss that and in favor of just raw combat. So if I had any advice, I do think classless systems are the way to go. I feel that having a wide range of skills allows people to sort of give even more personality to their characters without realizing it. I learned that all the way back on SSI's Eternal Dagger, where I felt like I started with a bunch of blank slates, but then because they provided so many skills for me to upgrade, each of my characters started having personalities based on their stats, which I thought was pretty cool. And beyond that, just do a lot of play testing, a lot of focus testing, and take that feedback to heart. Yeah, almost all the companion dialogues in Torment almost didn't make it, mostly because they didn't want to localize any more of the game. So I kind of just went ahead and did it anyway, and I'm like, look, if only the English folks see this, I'm sure someone else will translate this eventually. It was not a smart move. In fact, my boss told me it was a career-limiting move, which was his polite way of saying that, that puts a bullseye on my head for getting fired, which I got. But I really wanted to make sure you had a chance to explore like your companion's backstories more with the individual dialogue. So I'm happy I did that. But that was a very late game addition to Planescape Torment. But I think the game would have been missing a lot of its heart without it. Yeah, I agree, and the interesting thing is you can do very little to actually give them personalities like that. You can do things like just simple rewriting of voice sparks, which isn't in a large number of lines for how they react in combat. Even their combat AI can give them personalities, whether they support you or don't. And You might, if you ever get a chance to talk to the original Fallout 1 guys, with especially Tim Kaine, I think the companions in Fallout 1 ended up being an accident, where they're like, oh, we can't do this, so why don't we put some companions in? And then we were able to leverage that that gain into Fallout 2 and sort of expand their personalities even more. But it was really interesting to me that Fallout 1 never had intended to have companions at the start, but then it just kind of evolved that way once I think one of the scripters, Jesse Heinig, figured out a way to do it, and then it just made the game a lot cooler, especially with Dogmeat. I felt really bad for Dakon in Escape Torment. I felt like there's a sequence where you get to see how you first met him, and that sequence still makes me sad for how manipulative it is and how bad you feel for him as a victim. Because when it comes to describing the lowest point in someone's life, that's pretty much it. And then to use that as leverage in a very cruel way is just kind of adds insult to injury. So that's probably one that I'd point to. Well, to just to give you a direction for that, actually, that situation isn't a place in the game. It's what happens when you do a lot of digging into his dialogue and his ethics and the religion that he follows. And once you fully understand these concepts that are guiding him, at that point, you can start remembering things, and that's what takes you back to that very sad moment. Yeah, I played it when it first came out, and then I played it again before working on Wasteland 2. And while there wasn't a lot that influenced Fallout 2, except possibly some toaster references in the EPA and a few other design
User
hooks
in your
there,
channel stopped recording.
in my opinion, pretty minor, but they were Wasteland influenced. The big influence came with Old World Blues. Like you can see a lot of the homage elements in terms of types of weapons you can use, and also the whole presence of the robot scorpions, for example, was very much a tip of the hat to Wasteland. Those games actually made me see exploration in a different way. Like it's one thing to walk across the map in Fallout 2, or even walk across a map in an isometric game. But when suddenly you have full camera range to see like events on the horizon, for example, and then use those as hooks to lure the player in, or even as like compass points to sort of reference where you are in the wasteland, like that changes your level design aesthetic quite a bit, and it also makes it much easier for introducing quest seeds. Like, and this is a bad example, but like you see smoke on the horizon, or you see someone flashing like Morse code signal from on top of a tower in the distance. But those are things that you can choose to engage in that are much more difficult to do if you didn't have that camera available to you. And I'll be honest, I feel that the more freedom you give a player with interface, including customizing that interface and camera control, that makes the entire experience more freeing. So I'm pretty much in favor of that. It doesn't work for every game, but I think that with Fallout, it works pretty well. Um, that is a good question. So I have worked on one of those, and I did enjoy it. It was another opportunity to. So a lot of my current direction is I've been writing for menu-driven dialogue systems for a very, very long time, to the point where it feels kind of stale. So part of my goals over the next few years is I just want to try and like write for every genre and try and see what I can learn from it, whether it's like whether it's rogue style or VR or walking simulators. And walking simulators are really interesting in the sense that it's very important the world visually tell a story, but sometimes that feels like like it can't be enough. Like in Firewatch, Firewatch I think does a great job of blending the sense of sort of characters in the environment with your exploration of that environment, sort of exploration of self. And I think finding that really good balance is important. I also like the fact that they tend to feel like short stories to me, which, and I like short stories just because I feel like they get to the theme quicker and they get to the point faster, and they also get to it cleaner than a long sort of what I would describe as a messier 60 to 100 or 200 or 400-hour experience. Like Walking Simulator generally tells a very focused story while still giving you freedom within that territory you're exploring. Yeah, and I know that VR may be something that gives some listeners an allergic reaction, but the Firewatch, a Firewatch or a walking simulator experience in VR, I think is a lot more powerful than people realize that they haven't tried it. It's the immersion level just goes up so much, and if they can figure out how to solve a lot of the walking mechanics issues, I think that that's going to be a really powerful game experience in years to come. So whenever I get asked the dividing line for an RPG, I usually point to System Shock 2, and I'm like, there is one reason, in my opinion, that System Shock 2 is not an RPG, even though it seems to have every other element about it. And the element that it's missing is that I don't really have much of a choice about what's going on. I never really make a decision in that game other than shooting and advancing forward. Now, if there was a point where I could make some sort of decision, no matter how minor, then I think it would have been an RPG. But because it was much more of a, here's what the plot line's eventually going to be, and you have different ways to reach there, like action-wise, but you don't really interact with anyone in that game at all. And I think that's kind of what makes an RPG. There needs to be some element of player agency where you can sort of step back and go, based on the personality of my character, I would choose this option with this person, or how to solve this quest or this encounter that isn't just blowing it up, for example. And that's, I think, the key aspect. You need to be able to make your gameplay personality felt in some fashion and see a significant result as based on that, because that's what role playing's about. Like, you're taking on a role, and you want that role to have an impact in the environment. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like I love System Shock. I still point to it to this day for design examples and how to implement certain features that still confuse me why they're not being done to this day. I mean, because exploration-wise, the ability to choose your class, the fact that classes felt very different yet useful, the character generation backstory I thought was awesome. It reminded me a lot of Traveler. The open world level design, the voice acting, even for the cannon fodder was horrifying, and it was just so well executed that I applaud them to this day. Thing I do have to say is I feel like remake's probably not the best word. I would probably define it as a reboot, and I'm sure the team would do too, because the elements that I'm seeing, it's not going to be solely a one-for-one recreation of the original one. There's a lot more that I think is being introduced into the reboot that I think makes it qualify as a reboot. And some of it's really fascinating, and it's just stuff that we might take for granted nowadays, but wasn't available back in the time when System Shock 1 was being developed. But now there's all sorts of opportunities for leveraging that technology to sort of emphasize a lot of the stuff that they were doing in System Shock 1. So I think I'm kind of excited about that. They had so many cool stuff in System Shock 1. I am amazed. Like the ability to reclaim the healing chambers, which sounds, well, that's pretty basic. But that was a cool feature. I could see that being used for a lot of puzzles, for example. The sheer amount of cool technology elements you could grab, whether it was the skates or dealing with invisible monsters, like all that stuff. I'm just like, wow. And then they even had the difficulty mode, so even if you didn't want to deal with all the combat, they basically had a story mode in there that just made it super easy to get through the game. And no, there's just so much cool stuff they've done there. I'm amazed that they were able to get it all in. That's a good question. Did you guys feel that the transition from Fallout 2 to Fallout 3, did you guys find that very jarring? I'm going to suspect yes, but I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts.
Sure, I'll indulge. When I saw Fallout 3, which was ironically what I started off with before going to Fallout 2, 1, and then New Vegas, I remember seeing a lot of trailers about, and I believe I got involved in the Let's Play of Fallout 1 and 2, and I was very interested in the game. I always thought, and even though Fallout 3 with its modern technology, I always liked Fallout 1 and 2's gameplay a lot better, strangely. But one of the things that was really confusing to me is how they shifted dramatically in prioritizing role-playing elements to exploration and just just shooting and looting, which is to me what Fallout 3 really felt like. I felt like there was abandonment of game principles that were used in Fallout 1 and 2. Like there didn't really feel like these skills or the perks that you chose, because one of my favorite perks in Fallout New Vegas was confirmed bachelor in Churm Lim Cafes or something, which was really interesting because not only did it have like a small gameplay impact, but it also impacted your dialogue responses and whatnot. And I felt like also that your special system, the way you specialized in it, was pretty uniquely differently handled in Fallout 2 compared to Fallout 3, because you can be able to become a really charming and intelligent person, but also be physically weak, and it can show up in the game. And Fallout New Vegas did an excellent job at displaying a lot of the different kind of builds that players could go. And besides, I thought that the NPCs and that the factions that were used in Fallout 3 weren't really that interesting, and I felt like they should have gone for something new. And I'm glad in New Vegas, while you did have some elements like the Enclave Remnants, right? That's what it should have been, and it was a very touching and interesting experience. That's what I kind of felt like my Fallout 3 and Fallout 2 experience was.
Yeah, I kind of started with the same thing. Like played Fallout 3 first, and then I sort of played Fallout 1 a few years later. And by that time, I was still quite young, so I kind of started off with it and just needless to say, I didn't get far. But for me, going back and playing Fallout 2 and then playing Fallout 3 again, I can sort of sense that while I still enjoy Fallout 3, it kind of lost something in between the transition between Fallout 2 and 3. And I think New Vegas sort of brought something back over again. I think I like the sort of atmosphere in Fallout 3, as it kind of reminds me of Fallout 1. Like the two of them have very similar atmosphere, in my opinion. It's just how I sort of play it. I sort of feel New Vegas again brought back some of that atmosphere in some places, especially I think it was Vault 11, the one with the suicide vault. I think it was. That was quite a neat little vault, really. And
if I could break in, that is probably one of the best visual storytelling areas, I think. And New Vegas gets a lot of compliments about it. That's a perfect example of what you can tell with props.
oh yeah, like every time I just talk about Fallout, I just mention that one vault as saying you should just play it just for that one place alone. Of course, the story's also really good as well, but for me, Fallout 3 kind of gave a lot more exploration to the series. It sort of there was something there in the third and first person which couldn't be done in the isometric sort of play games as well. But I think with isometric, you sort of had the sort of sense that the world was much bigger. There was a lot more communication between the settlements in Fallout 1 and 2 than in Fallout 3. And I think in general, I kind of preferred how I can sort of have different play styles in Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas, as opposed to 3, which is, again, just sort of shoot and loot, but it wasn't quite to the extent that Fallout 4 was.
Well, to me, this transition was not that jarring because, well, I've always been a big fan of the Elder Scrolls games, so basically it felt kind of right for me, but well, not exactly for Fallout. I mean, I was expecting a bit of a different game in that regard, but yeah. I mean, this, as it was mentioned before, this whole shift to a more exploratory style of gameplay, that was definitely took some time to get used to, and also I didn't really like the later Elder Scrolls games like Oblivion with the handling, like with all the quest markers and this more streamlined type of gameplay there. So, but yeah, in general it was relatively a smooth transition, at least for me.
Well, I first started with Fallout 3, like a lot of people. And so, the other game I played after that was New Vegas, and it was it felt more. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to put it in words, but it just felt like it more impactful with me than Fallout 3. It was like I felt like my choices, more of my choices mattered. There's more interaction with the environment, and sorry, I'm having a hard time thinking about this right now. The world felt more. It felt more believable. I was very appreciative of the dialogue and the interactions with different characters in the world. It felt more impactful.
Just
Yeah.
really quick, what you said
Yeah,
about
no.
what you said about Stalker there, really quick. But just so you know, I think the Stalker's interface mechanics actually had a big influence on the hardcore interface mechanics and organization for New Vegas. But just as a sideline there.
Yeah, how am I sounding? Okay, so in my opinion,
Uh-oh.
He must have a low luck score.
Like that Google Hangout incident where Google hated me for no reason.
Google Hangouts is a very touchy system. If I could ever default to Skype, for me, Skype generally carries the day, but Google Hangouts just never seems to work that first time, and it wastes so much time trying to get it organized. Anyway, it's not just you, man. That thing, I think it's out for me. I have to warn you, just to sound a 5-minute warning, and then I have to go off to my System Shock reboot meeting. But I just want to give you a heads up. Oh, that is very kind. Thank you very much.
okay, so I will start by saying that originally I started with Fallout New Vegas, so I didn't start from the beginning, but going from Fallout New Vegas to Fallout 1 and 2, I didn't exactly get to play Fallout 3, but I have done a lot of research and looked up a lot about what it's about. I've seen some videos, and to be honest, going from Fallout 1 and 2 to Fallout 3, I think I would have to agree with that. To be honest, the third Fallout game feels more like a theme ride, like I don't know, like a big theme park. It doesn't seem to have much continuity. And while they did give some callbacks to some of the people from the previous games, I don't know. It was a giant change, and I don't really think it was for the better. But considering that Fallout New Vegas was able to uh, bring back some of what, actually a lot of what Fallout 1 and 2 did, even if it wasn't isometric, I think if they would have went along with that, I don't think it would have been nearly as different, jarring, even though it had some other problems, but that's about it for me.
Yeah, I'd go back and fix the layout for Lonesome Road. I think there was a huge error in the design direction for that DLC, and that providing a linear experience is not something that any Fallout fan wants. Yeah, but there were other ways to structure it. One of the other design ideas, which we didn't go with, was that Ulysses would present you with backstories about the communities that used to live in that area, and then set up a context for what was lost at the end. But that was intended to be a much more of an open world environment, where like you could go to 5 or 6 different places to learn about what had come before, as well as seeing what it was now, and then use that to inform your decision at the end, and also use that as an additional convincing tool for why he's so very wrong, because he is incredibly wrong. But that was one direction, and I really wish we'd gone with that, to be honest. Well, actually, me and Sven Venke from Larian Studios were actually having this discussion. Once you've gone through the process like 2 or 3 times and you've made a lot of mistakes, and we both have, you sort of form this really weird mental checklist of approaches for how you tackle characters or quests that you don't necessarily even write down anymore. It's just a pattern that you follow. Some things that have aided me with character design in the past is there was this series of supplements called Central Casting that will allow you like sort of randomly roll up like backgrounds for characters, and that was fun. I also keep an idea file on quests and spells and locations and characters and quests that you on my computer that I usually just like do digital notes from my Kindle, or when I'm watching a movie or a TV series, I'll take a screenshot of a location or a piece of dialogue and then use that as sort of like a big idea folder that I'll sort it through if I have writer's block, which doesn't seem to be happening much nowadays, so I feel really bad that I'm still collecting all that stuff. And then the best way I've always found to start is when you're doing a character request, you examine all the systems in the game, how that quest or character can help support it or inform it from a narrative perspective. Also, how the player can influence it through the systems they have at their disposal. Like Fallout, for example, has the speech, combat, stealth, but also evil and good, and what faction type you are. All those can come into play. Just make sure you're considering them each one at a time when dealing with an NPC or quest. And usually a lot of the game world, the game logic will help inform you about how those situations should turn out. And that's a lot of fun. And if it turns out that, you have more than one idea for a quest or character, the nice thing about designing for an RPG is you can explore all those branches and go, well, there's 3 ways I think would be cool. Why don't I just do all 3 of them? And then that ends up a lot more freedom than, say, when you're doing like a graphic novel, or if you're doing like a short story or prose. And that's kind of one of the advantages that I think games has. But blah, 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 blah.
Actually, I wanted to ask about a specific pen and paper system that you were using in your playtest sessions back then. I think I read some interview at some point.
Yeah, just really quick, and maybe I'll just leave it there. So we actually took the system we were going to use for Van Buren and made that pen and paper, and because it was designed to be turn-based, it all worked. So everyone just took their turns and ran through the quest, and all the skills were there, and we tried out the new traits and the new perks, and we had a whole range of players, from role players to the more like mini-max guys, that would let me know when certain systems were broken and then suggest fixes for it. And that was really valuable. So we had like about, I think, 12 players at its height, and each one had a different character they built with a different specialty, and that informed all the area designs and quest locations, and really helped sort of like kick around those systems before we actually digitally implemented those.
All right, really good. So a lot of percentile dice rolls and yeah.
Well, hey, thank you for inviting me, and I realized there was a bunch of questions we weren't able to get to, so if you want to do another one in the future, I'm happy to make the time. I know that This one took a little while to set up, but again, like I'm happy to do one in the future. I'm sure I'd be happy to carve out some more space if you guys wanted to ask any more questions. Just let me know. Oh, no worries at all. We are all busy. I think that just happens as life goes on. And you guys have a good day as well. And again, thanks for
Thank you very
inviting me
much.
to talk.
Thank you.
And said that we were coming back to stay. With hopeful heart I waited for you, knocked on the door. I waited, but you must have lost your way.
One of the defining traits of Western role-playing games, descended as they are from the grand tradition of tabletop RPGs, is character building, using both story elements and gameplay systems to express a character to take on a given adventure. And while some recent RPGs attempt to force a role onto the player, like, say, Deus Ex's Adam Jensen or The Witcher's Geralt, the tradition of character creation mostly continues, from big-budget games like Dragon Age to more modestly budgeted and even crowdfunded productions. Pillars of Eternity came out earlier this year, and before that was Wasteland 2 in 2014, which even comes with a little freeform biography section for the characters to establish whatever backstory you want. The original Wasteland was, of course, the precursor to Fallout, which also inherited the same open-ended approach to role-playing inspired by tabletop systems. When Bethesda purchased the Fallout franchise in 2007, however, the subsequent games were no longer niche isometric turn-based role-playing games. Fallout had become a sprawling open world shown in first person where every character is voiced and physical combat gets leaned on far more than other forms of problem solving. And this has created a tension in playstyles that I think has come to a head in Fallout 4. It feels caught between its legacy as a tabletop-influenced role-playing game that lets you create your own characters, and its current position as a huge, expensive, open-world action RPG. To start, let's look at how Fallout used to work. The original Fallout was actually intended to utilize GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, a pen-and-paper role-playing setup designed to be applicable to pretty much any scenario. When that deal fell through, though, Black Isle invented their own system, the Special System, which took a number of ideas from GURPS while still being legally distinct. Combining core character stats, skills, and optional traits, the idea was to give players a really broad palette from which to create characters. Want to make a Mr. Magoo type? Simply pump perception way down and luck way up, and you have a character with a much smaller vision radius but superhumanly good fortune. You could explore the wastes as a sleazy car salesperson by bringing charisma and perception way up, but having endurance, strength, and agility be kinda low. Or maybe you're a super gymnast with high endurance and agility, but slightly lower than average perception, luck, and intelligence. And maybe throw in the small frame or finesse optional traits. These stats and perks and traits ultimately determine your playstyle, yes, but they also say something about who your character is, what they're good at, and why they're good at it. If a character has exceptional strength or intelligence, or if a character is particularly unlucky or ungraceful, that informs your understanding of that character. While you can improve your special stats later in the game, opportunities to do so tend to be rare and or expensive, so these core stats feel rather rigid and static and end up defining who your character is both in playstyle and in a story sense. The super science genius Vault Dweller is going to have a very different story than the hulking strongman Vault Dweller. It's also important to point out that all characters start at average in all stats and have a few points to disperse, but not a lot. If you want to be good at more than one thing, you have to start sacrificing other things. The same line of thinking also goes into the optional traits, which tend to have a major advantage and a major disadvantage attached to them. Take chem resistance, for example. If you have it, addiction is far less likely, but the benefits of the drugs themselves are shorter lived. Or look at the Jinxed perk, where you're more likely to have a critical miss, but so is every other character near you. You don't really get anything for free in this system. Every point comes with either its own negative or the opportunity cost to do something else. You can't be super strong and super charismatic and super agile and super smart. It's not a system designed for building superheroes. The whole special system in Fallout 1 and 2 is designed to create someone with strength and with flaws, with skills that can help them get through the adventure to come, but also the ability to run into situations where they need to run away, or to rely on friends, or even simply fail and move on. Now let's compare that to how special works in Fallout 4. The most immediate change is that the special stats no longer default to 5 as a baseline, with the ability to add points to some categories by taking points away from others. Instead, we have a system where every character has a baseline of average at 1 and can only move up as they gain experience. And think about what this does to the role-playing aspect of Fallout 4. First, it removes the opportunity for real weaknesses. You can no longer play a character who is a 95-pound weakling, or is crazy unlucky, or embarrassingly uncharismatic, or clumsy to the extreme. So instead of having things you fail at, or things that are weaknesses, we now have a roundly average character who simply has things they can't do because they're not amazing at them. Or rather, things they can't do because they're not amazing at them yet. The other impact to role-playing is that because each stat is upgradable after every level is gained, the sense that these special stats were somehow permanent or reflective of an underlying character has all but disappeared. With no level cap in place, playing Fallout 4 is basically a grind to go from average at most things and okay at some things, to a godlike superhuman in all skills and all abilities. To further remove your ability to sculpt a character or playstyle from the system, there are level caps for each perk. So, for example, you can't just continue to dump points into sneaking once you have 3 agility. You need to reach certain level thresholds, often more than 10 levels apart, in order to increase your stealthiness. That means for those 10 levels you're forced to put points into other skills and perks. So you can't really specialize or play a stealth character so much as you can prioritize unlocking stealth first because that's how you would like to play, and ultimately come back around to it 10 levels later when you finally can get the next iteration of the stealth perk. What I'm getting at is that the character definition systems in Fallout 4 really don't facilitate playing a role, at least not in a traditional role-playing game sense. Yeah, you get to pick your character's name, gender, and face, and yeah, there are some limitations on you early in the game before you're a superhuman that restrict your playstyle a little bit. But the sense of creating a person with a set list of skills and abilities that reflect a backstory or general personality type is simply no longer there. This gets reinforced by the game's other systems, most notably how dialogue has changed. Previous Fallout games have tried to provide a variety of dialogue options to facilitate role-playing in different ways. Low intelligence characters would have special dialogue options, and high science, speechcraft, barter, or other skills could also open up additional dialogue trees. Again, it's systems existing to facilitate role-playing in an environment where, because of the nature of computer RPGs in comparison to tabletop games, not every potentiality could actually be considered. Even Fallout 3, Bethesda's first Fallout title, managed to hold on to this. In the intro sequence, the player character gets thrown a birthday party attended by Butch, the resident bully. After the player gets a sweet roll as a present from an elderly vault dweller, Butch demands his share.
I'm hungry, and that stupid robot destroyed the cake. Give me that sweet roll you got from Old Lady Palmer.
The game offers several options as a response, from the submissive to the passive-aggressive to the aggressive-aggressive. You could be snarky, or you could be a tattletale, or you could give in to his demands, or you could try to broker peace by offering him half. Each would say something about who you're trying to play as. In Fallout 4, however, that's all been replaced by a simple 4-option system that seems to present 4 options because that's how many face buttons are on a typical controller? And that's really the only explanation anyone can come up with. It doesn't make any sense. 4 is too many for a yes, no, please repeat setup, and too few for an expressive breadth of options. It almost always feels like they've just either padded out a yes, no, or really limited an actual role-playing setup.
Tell me everything you can, no matter how painful it might be.
There was a man and a woman. They didn't say much.
But worse than the arbitrarily consistent number of options is the fact that you get a terse word or two to describe your selections, often not really enough to know what some of the answers will entail. Like, look at this exchange.
Kellogg.
He worked for you?
Kellogg. He was an Institute asset long before I arrived here. It wasn't until I became director that I learned of all the things he'd done. What kind of man he was.
You used him could be an accusatory tone, like, you used him? Or it could be, you used him? Expressing shock that the Institute would work with such a scoundrel. It could be the disappointment of a parent hearing that their son got his hands dirty. You used him? You were involved? But without any additional context, those 3 words could go any of those ways, and possibly even more. This problem plagues any dialogue option that doesn't warrant a yes or a no, and sometimes even those end with a confusing, sarcastic choice. Like when Piper offers to help if you do her interview. There's the option to agree to do the interview, to not do the interview, to ask what the interview entails, and to sarcastic. Is it a yes to the interview sarcastically? A no? A sarcastic dismissal of the whole concept? Is it a charismatic attempt to charm her past the entire interview into just joining you? Who knows? It's just sarcastic.
Listen, after breakfast, I was thinking we could head to the park.
Oh, right. The park. With you. Because I want to get pregnant again.
Sir? Mom? You should come and see this!
What's odd is that this isn't the only game to suffer from this. Mass Effect has had this problem for years, and for some reason Bethesda thought it would be a good idea to emulate that here. Deus Ex Human Revolution also does it, but at least it explains what each option is. But neither of those games are renowned for their dialogue options, and Fallout 4 is arguably worse than either. The point is, the role of dialogue has been greatly diminished. Not completely excised, mind you. You can still end a few quests without combat by passing a charisma check, for example. But it no longer feels like another avenue to expression. You're no longer looking at a series of 5 or even 10 options and wondering what your character would say. You're looking at 4, always 4, short phrases, trying to infer what they really actually mean, and realizing that they almost all amount to false choices or some variation of a choice between yes, I'll do it, and not now. And all of this sounds really negative, but I'm trying hard not to come off that way. It would be easy to stamp my feet and dismiss all of this as quote-unquote dumbing down. And, well, okay, maybe the dialogue system is a little insulting to their audience with its let's not make them read too much or we'll scare them away approach, but a lot of these decisions make sense when you look at the game for what Bethesda seems to be actually trying to make. As a game developer, Bethesda really has its own aesthetic, or at least a series of interesting fixations. Their games tend to be a bit genre-defying, exploration-based action RPGs that are as much wandering simulators as they are Diablos. It's this wholly unique thing that doesn't really get made by anyone else. A game with all of the loot gathering and stat mongering of an ARPG, but much of the gameplay is spent quietly roaming the countryside for points of interest and discovering the stories and items that await you there. And they've always been games that don't really value character expression so much as they value player expression. And that, I think, is one of the key differences between Fallout 1 and 2, and to some extent New Vegas, and Fallout 4, and to some extent Fallout 3. When you stop trying to roleplay and just start doing things that are cool to you, the player, Fallout 4 becomes a fundamentally different game. And I'm sure there's a lot of people going, well, duh, right now, but realize if you've been following the franchise since day one, it's both a profound shift and also a subtle one that's kind of hard to pick up on. You still have a character creation screen, you still have a skill system, and you still have dialogue options and relationships with characters. But none of those are about the guy or gal you've made. They're about you, the player. You get to decide what characters you want to bring along with you on this adventure. You get to build your own custom guns and custom power armor. Heck, you get to paint the armor with cool patterns and change the color of the headlight. You get to build your own custom villages and play mayor. And as you play, you can focus your perks to unlock your preferred playstyle. These choices are never, ever framed as, what would your character do? They're framed as, what would you want to do right now? How do you want to express yourself in this game space? The player character, in a very real sense, doesn't really exist much in Fallout 4. The character is mostly you. And it makes sense, right? If their aesthetic is something of a blend of walking simulators and ARPGs, then it stands to reason that they treat their characters in a similar manner. That is, they stand in for the player with the recognition that the actual avatar means next to nothing. And that is like a huge shift for a game that used to want to use tabletop role-playing conventions and was subtitled a post-nuclear role-playing game. The player character is dead, long live the player. And when the game is viewed through this lens, a power fantasy game built for the player about exploring wastes, learning its histories, and collecting its loot while expressing themselves in various ways, it succeeds tremendously. It's hard to say I didn't enjoy some of the more absurd moments or wacky combat. I mean, there's sniping with rocket launchers. Or awkward conversations.
Looks like you've done well for yourself.
It's a good start, yeah. Proud of all the work we did. What if this place could be more than just a weapon? What if it could also be... We want this to be a place that maybe we could make people take a second look. Maybe then they see that we're not monsters.
I think it's a great idea.
You really think so?
And then there was my favorite, giving ultimatums to the guy in power armor with a minigun.
Go ahead and give me everything you own, and I'll initiate you as a first-level pillar of the community.
must think I'm an idiot.
Well, you came in here, didn't you? Now, you've got two choices. Give me everything you've got, or we take it anyway.
I'm walking out of here. Your choice what you want to do about it.
That's not how this works.
You crazy?
And the vignettes left on computer logs or in notes, or even just in the artful placement of a corpse and some items, can be surprisingly effective. And how cool is it to have customized hot rod power armor chilling in a base I built myself? Yes, it's a far more shallow, popcorny experience than the more cerebral act of taking on another person's role through statistics and dice rolls, but it also kind of had to be this big. Fallout wouldn't be the smash hit it's become, and couldn't justify the huge investment it cost to build if it were a niche adaptation of pen and paper staples. But even though the game's much more enjoyable when you don't try to force the concept of role-playing onto it, there's still a tension there. There's a lot of legacy bits from Fallout that simply make no sense anymore. A lot of the perks are crammed into weird special slots, for example. Why does perception make you better at demolitions? Why does charisma make you immune to being an alcoholic? Why does your intelligence give your Pip-Boy a new feature? I feel like going to a straight-up skill tree, which the new system basically emulates anyway, would be more honest and straightforward. But the biggest issue is the few times they do ask you to roleplay. The shift back to, wait, no, the player character does matter here, is sometimes abrupt, and the rules change arbitrarily. You're supposed to go after your son, which by any measure should be the character's #1 priority, but the game encourages you as the player to screw around for days and days until you do another story mission, at which point your character comes back and is a driven, desperate parent.
Will you help us?
No time to waste. Look, dumbass, that's not how baseball was played.
That right, Mr. Smarty Pants? Give me Sean. The real Sean. Right now!
And while player agency is usually tossed aside in the interests of the core story, like how you can't talk your way out of fighting Kellogg, which, as a charisma-based character, was infuriating, there are times it's suddenly reintroduced without warning. For example, you can't kill the first courser you go on a mission with and free the synth you've been sent to retrieve because you haven't had a few father-son moments the game wants to be sure that you've had. But once you've had those conversations, the player can suddenly decide that capturing synths isn't for them and they can turn against the Institute. The only way to find out whether it's an option is to attack the courser and see if they're immortal for story reasons. If they die, great, you get to express yourself in the game space. If not, well, hey, we have a story to tell and we don't want you messing it up. There are all these little moments where the game wakes up and remembers it's supposed to be an RPG, and they feel forced and the options they offer feel flaccid or arbitrary. So I find myself really torn on how to feel about Fallout 4. On one hand, it's a continuation of a franchise that used to pride itself on a very player-character-centric view of the world, one that emphasized creating a character and playing a role. And the fact that it kind of looks, at least on the surface, like it's still engaged in that approach, and even occasionally asks me to make actual role-playing decisions, makes the game feel frustrating at times. But I'm also really a fan of engaging with games on their own terms, to judge whether they're a success or failure based on what they aim to do rather than what I wish they did, and in that sense I think the game's terrific. It's a great exploration-based action RPG in the vein of other Bethesda games. So do I celebrate the fact that Fallout is now this really entertaining, if shallow, combination of player expression and exploration? I mean, I like both of those things, and everybody I know has their own Fallout 4 stories already. It's a great little game. Or do I lament the loss of deeper role-playing options in exchange for an emphasis on combat that is, frankly, not that great? Is it okay to lament that loss even if it's not what the game's trying to do anymore? My current answer is to feel both.